I suppose what I want to do is first, while we're all very high at the mere sight of what's happening, is to puncture a little bit the air of celebration and try and encourage you all to think about not, worst case scenarios and the seriousness of what we're trying to do. Because, both Brexit and austerity were designed to, screw down the working class, to reduce wages, to reduce the size of the state, and to enrich the financial elite that runs this country. But you can't do Brexit, you can't do that if Jeremy Corbyn is in power. And so what I would expect between now and the moment where Labour might come to power is that both the austerity is going to be reduced, and they might even give up Brexit if the price of it is stopping us coming to power. That's why they've given an extra 2 years, so they can stop us coming to power. They fear a radical left Labour government, for definite. And they have good reason to do that, because the system they're running doesn't work. And we are the first social democratic party in the world to say, when we come to power, 30 years of neoliberalism is going to be over. However, they're not so happy about that. Between now and then, I think it's important that we all wage a battle of rationality, of rational ideas, trying to convince people who may try to stop us that we indeed do have a holistic and coherent answer for the problem of the old model. And I think I'll say to John, you'll be hopefully gladdened by this, that in the press room at Labour Party conference when John was giving that speech, usually all these hacks, you take the piss basically. You just take the piss and make jokes about what was going on. It was a pin drop silence because the speech bears rereading, and actually rereading with a little yellow pen, because it was a logical sequence of ideas that was convincing people. It may not enthuse my colleagues in the press, but you could see that they could see the viable future for a British capitalism that was like you described it. So that's the first thing we need to do. I've just been to a big meeting with Chatham House, the Foreign Affairs think tank, full of the usual kind of people who go to that. And again, what I was at pains to do is another thing that may not be massively popular, but which is what Alexis Tsipras taught me watching him do the sequence of coming to power. If you're going to take their economic power away from them, don't at the same time take their toys away from them. And I think that's difficult for many of us who've spent our life in anti-imperialist, anti-militarist politics. Tsipras' first call, wasn't it, was to the army. Yeah. You say, it's fine. NATO, Tsipras even puts on the flak jacket to visit the frigate. Yeah? I think we'll have to do that. It's not that popular among some left-wingers in Labour, but I think we'll have to do it. Now, to your question, we get into, hopefully, best case scenario, that convincing story of economic competence, of a different model, of essential continuity in terms of, not foreign policy, but there's going to be an army, there's going to be nuclear weapons, etc. There's going to be a police force, all these things that the right-wing establishment believe that far leftists are going to do to them. If we get to a rational point where we can convince the middle terrain of Britain we're in power, what happens then? Now, here is the threat. The threat is that of capital flight. We don't have the same problem that Syriza had. If Syriza actually had an advantage over us, you can't short the euro. Yeah. I mean, the euro wasn't collapsing. But it is possible that there will be both a logical attack on sterling, that is, people pull their money out because they don't want to see a Corbyn government. So if you have money in the water industry, and you've just heard John say we're going to nationalise it, you're thinking, anybody with water shares right now is taking a 50-50 bet on Labour not coming to power. So you can see the rational concern they might have, but there's also the irrational one. The city is sure full of banks like BlackRock and Goldman, but there is a blue-blooded Tory, completely reactionary, anti-Labour layer in the city who would take very great pride in staging an attack on us, a financial market attack. If you want the template for it, it's what happened to François Mitterrand in France between 1981 and 1983. It bears rereading. We should all be rereading that. Right. Suppose they do. There's things that the government can do, and one thing is actually to project a confidence, as Anne says, but also a clear financial strategy, and also a long-term investment strategy. Yeah. Because the long-term money, the responsible money of pension funds, even of fund management firms, massive fund management firms, what they're all looking for is long-term stability and value. At the same time, large companies always say, I spent 13 years as a business and economics reporter, what they always say is, we can deal with any country, any regime, as long as we have stability, as long as we know we have a predictable path of investment. We're a hydrocarbon company like Shell. Well, do you want fracking or not? Because we've also got solar and we've also got wind. Just tell us what it is you want, is what usually big firms say. So I think we can do that as well. But I think, in the end, the social movement has to be mobilised. And this is what I would urge some of you, I would urge everybody to think, what contribution can I make to that moment? It could be, here in Brighton, you've got a little cooperative cafe. Good. That's the kind of businesses we want to grow and template and work out and spread that model. It could be that you're an expert like Anne is or other people in economic policy, and John's got this mechanism whereby you can feed into his team policy formation. But in the end, what I would like to see is this. We don't go for everything in the manifesto at once. I would like to see that, for me, the biggest injustice, over and above the austerity, which, as Len says, is the number one thing we're going to cancel. The biggest injustice is the injustice in the workplace. And I think that you need an emergency budget. That'll take you 90 days to even write it. I would think, for it to be meaningful. You'll have legislation like renationalising railways, the water. That takes time. That goes through Parliament. But new workplace laws, some of which don't have to go through Parliament, some of which are simply alterations to current laws. I would say scrapping 0 hours contracts, empowering everybody with rights at work from day one. Those things are doable. And why? Why should we prioritise them? Because what we need to do is to give every ordinary British person, everybody who lives here, a stake in the survival of the Labour government. Yay! So that government, unlike what happened when Blair came to power, you could have this big discussion about ethical foreign policy, but do this. It was an upswing of capitalism. Likewise, when Wilson clung to power, Wilson was barely in power and had to step very, very carefully. Attlee was in power, and they were able to, on the night of the Labour election victory, it wasn't recorded, there was no social media, nobody was really listening. The workers were mobilising. Now, we don't have that glorious kind of old working class, not much of it is left. But what we do have is the social movements and the networks, and there's hundreds of actual social movements here in Brighton at this event. Yeah. Now, example, every Starbucks, every Amazon warehouse, every pub, like these stand-up pubs that are all up and down the street, has to have a sign saying, every worker here has human rights. Yeah. Every worker here has labour rights. Workplace reps, I've been a workplace rep, many people here have probably been one as well. There's always a little sign saying the health and safety. Where that sign says the health and safety should be what the union rights are. And then we pick people who don't want to play ball with those union rights, and we very quickly make them realise that they're going to give them. And in other words, read the Labour history, read the history of, for example, the French Popular Front. It came to power, amid with a big strike wave. But unless you have the interaction of immediate self-empowerment by people and the government delivering a clear series of decisions and laws, what you get is that the backlash against us, which you know what it'll be, Daily Mail, run on the pound feared, run starts, Financial Times, Corbyn in crisis, has no answer to run on the pound. They'll manufacture the crisis even if it doesn't take place. All we have is the kind of social strength that this is the second one of these things. Every time we land, like the Starship Enterprise in the city, TWT and the Labour Party, we radicalise it. But you know what happened in Liverpool last time? Here's the same. There's tens of pubs discussing all kinds of stuff. You know, radical ideas. That in every city. That in every city, or we get less than half of what we wanted, because what Theano just said is true about Syriza. The tragedy of Syriza is that the oncoming train of the IMF and ECB knocked them into a defensive role for 6 months, and you know the guy who was in charge of social movement, alternative economics, wiring up the valleys with Wi-Fi and co-ops, ended up as running the state energy company. So you know they got pushed into crisis mode. We needed everybody mobilised in crisis mode. And the last thing I'll say is, enthusiastic though you may be, you know, what did Frederick Engels, you know, say about the American Civil War? Recruits always demand to be immediately sent to the front in a war. That's what they do. That's, if you're new to politics, that's what you'll do. And and they said, and they always get defeated. And the first thing they then say is they've always been betrayed. It must be somebody's fault. We might have to retreat the equivalent of 2,000 kilometres, and like in Stalingrad, be in a siege for 6 months. You might see the government make compromises and retreats. That's how you get victory. It's not very easy, but when you get it, my goodness, we will change the world.